The heart monitor's shrill beep cuts through the elegant silence of the Tompkins mansion as Henry Tompkins collapses face first into his imported marble floor, his champagne glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. But what happened next shocked everyone who thought they knew this billionaire's story. Just 4 hours earlier, Henry stood in his mahogany-paneled office, adjusting his Armani tie before the mirror. At 62, he commanded respect in boardrooms across Manhattan, his real estate empire worth over $2 billion. The phone rang incessantly, but Henry ignored it, pressing his palm against his chest as a sharp pain shot through his ribs. "Just stress," he muttered to his reflection, though his face had turned an alarming shade of pale gray. Downstairs, Sarah Jenkins moved quietly through the mansion's grand hallways, her worn sneakers silent against the Persian rugs. At 55, she'd worked for the Tompkins family for nearly 20 years, watching Henry build his fortune while his personal relationships crumbled. Her dark hands, weathered from years of service, carried fresh linens to the master bedroom. "Mr. Tompkins," she called softly, noticing his office door ajar. "Your guests will be arriving soon for the charity gala." Henry emerged, straightening his shoulders and forcing his practiced billionaire smile. "Of course, Sarah. Everything looks perfect, as always." But Sarah's trained eye caught the slight tremor in his hands, the way he gripped the doorframe for support. Little did Henry know that his body was already betraying him, sending warning signals he'd spent months ignoring. The charity gala commenced at 7 sharp, Manhattan's elite filling the mansion's ballroom with their glittering jewelry and hollow laughter. Henry worked the room like the consummate host he'd always been, shaking hands with senators and CEOs while Sarah supervised the catering staff from the kitchen. "Has anyone seen my father's medication?" Emily Tompkins asked the server, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood. Henry's estranged daughter had flown in from California, their relationship strained by years of his workaholic neglect. The server shrugged, but Sarah overheard from across the room. She'd noticed Henry's pill bottles growing dusty on his nightstand, his doctor's calls going unreturned. This decision would change everything. At precisely 9:47 p.m., Henry excused himself from a conversation about offshore investments, his breathing becoming labored. The chest pain returned with vengeance, radiating down his left arm like lightning. He stumbled toward the library, seeking privacy, but his legs gave out just inside the doorway. Sarah was arranging desserts when she heard the crash. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, "When something don't sound right, you better go check." She'd learned to trust her instincts during her childhood in rural Alabama, where neighbors looked after each other because no one else would. Racing toward the sound, Sarah found Henry sprawled unconscious on the library floor, his skin ashen and lips turning blue. She dropped to her knees, pressing her ear to his chest. Nothing. His pulse had vanished completely. "Help! Somebody help!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the mansion corridors. But the real shock was still coming. The party guests were too absorbed in their champagne conversations to hear her cries from the distant library. Sarah's hands shook as she tilted Henry's head back, remembering the CPR certification she'd earned years ago when her own father had his first heart attack. She'd never imagined she'd need those skills to save her employer's life. Placing her hands on Henry's chest, Sarah began compressions, counting aloud, 1, 2, 3. His body felt lifeless beneath her palms, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained. The irony struck her, here was Henry Tompkins, who owned half of Manhattan, completely helpless and dependent on his maid for survival. The grandfather clock chimed 10 o'clock as Sarah continued her desperate efforts, sweat beading on her forehead. Henry's face remained ghostly pale, his eyes rolled back. She'd been performing CPR for what felt like hours, though only minutes had passed. "Come on, Mr. Tompkins," she whispered between compressions. "Don't you dare leave Emily all alone in this world." But the silence stretched on, broken only by the distant sound of laughter from the gala and the grandfather clock's relentless ticking. Henry's heart had stopped completely, and Sarah realized with growing horror that she might be the only thing standing between this man and death. The heart monitor she'd call for hadn't arrived yet, but she could feel it in her bones. Henry Tompkins was slipping away, and time was running out fast. The flatline beep cuts through the silence like a knife. Sarah stares at the heart monitor's straight green line, her world collapsing in that instant. But 23 years of raising 5 children and working 3 jobs has taught her one thing: when life hits you, you hit back harder. Not today, Mr. Tompkins. Not on my watch. Sarah drops to her knees beside Henry's motionless body, her hands finding the center of his chest. The CPR training she took at the community center last year floods back to her. She positions her palms, one over the other, and begins compressions. 1, 2, 3, the rhythm becomes her heartbeat. Come on, she whispers between breaths, tilting Henry's head back and breathing life into his lungs. The storm outside pounds against the mansion's windows like it's trying to break in and steal what little hope remains in this room. Thunder crashes overhead as Sarah's phone buzzes. She grabs it with shaking hands while maintaining compressions with one arm. 911, what's your emergency? My employer collapsed. He's not breathing, no pulse. I'm doing CPR right now. Sarah's voice cracks but stays strong. Ma'am, we have units dispatched to your location, but the storm is causing significant delays. Trees are down across several roads. You're looking at least 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Sarah's heart sinks. She's heard the statistics: every minute without oxygen damages the brain more. But as she looks at Henry's pale face, she sees something that surprises everyone who knows their relationship. She sees the man who quietly paid for her grandson's surgery last year. The man who pretends not to notice when she takes home leftovers for her family. The man who's never once spoken to her with anything but respect, even when his friends suggested he upgrade to younger help. Then I guess it's just you and me, Mr. Tompkins, she says, resuming compressions with renewed determination. The room fills with the sound of her counting: 26, 27, 28, punctuated by the storm's fury. Rain lashes the windows so hard it sounds like gravel. Sarah's arms burn, but she refuses to stop. 3 minutes pass. Her back screams in agony, sweat drips down her face, but she pushes through. This is why seeing Henry collapse hit her so hard, because despite the obvious differences in their worlds, she's come to care for this man. Not as an employer, but as someone she's watched struggle with loneliness behind his wealth. Someone who works 18-hour days because he doesn't know how else to fill the empty spaces in his life. But here's what Sarah doesn't know yet: this storm that's keeping the ambulance away is the same storm that brought Henry's daughter Emily racing back from New York tonight. Emily, who hasn't spoken to her father in 3 years after their explosive fight about his refusal to help her struggling nonprofit. Emily, who's been sitting in her car outside this mansion for the past hour, working up the courage to knock on the door and apologize. Sarah's phone buzzes again. Ma'am, this is dispatch. How's he doing? Still nothing, Sarah gasps, not stopping her compressions. But I'm not giving up. You hear me? I'm not stopping until help gets here. 4 minutes now. Sarah's training echoes in her head. After 4 minutes, brain damage becomes likely. But she's seen miracles before. She's lived through things that should have broken her, and somehow she's still standing. If she can survive raising 5 kids on minimum wage after her husband walked out, if she can work 3 jobs and still find energy to volunteer at the church soup kitchen, then she can save this man's life. The lights flicker as thunder shakes the house. In the darkness between lightning strikes, Sarah keeps counting, keeps pushing life back into Henry Tompkins. She thinks about her grandmother's words: "Baby girl, sometimes the Lord puts us exactly where we need to be, even when we can't see why." Sarah has always wondered why fate led her to work for Henry Tompkins, a man whose world should have nothing in common with hers. But as she fights to keep him alive, she's beginning to understand. The storm rages on, the ambulance remains trapped, and Sarah's arms feel like they're about to give out. Just as her strength begins to fail, headlights pierce through the rain-soaked windows. But these aren't the flashing lights of an ambulance, they belong to a midnight blue Mercedes pulling into the circular driveway. Emily Tompkins steps out into the storm, completely unaware that inside this house, a woman she's never met is fighting to save the most important person in both their lives. The paramedics burst through the door like a force of nature, their equipment clattering as they rushed to Henry's motionless form. Sarah stepped back, her hands still trembling from the CPR compressions she'd been performing for what felt like an eternity. "How long has he been down?" the lead paramedic barked, immediately checking for a pulse. "For minutes, maybe 5, Sarah breathed, watching as they worked with practiced efficiency. The portable defibrillator charged with an ominous whine that made her stomach clench. "Clear!" The shock jolted Henry's body, but the heart monitor remained stubbornly flat. Sarah pressed her hands to her mouth, fighting back tears as they tried again. And again. On the third attempt, a weak but steady beep filled the room. Henry's chest rose slightly, and Sarah felt her knees nearly give out from relief. "We've got him stabilized, but barely," the paramedic announced, loading Henry onto the stretcher. "Ma'am, are you family?" "I." Sarah hesitated. What was she exactly? Just an employee? "I'm the one who found him. I've worked for Mr. Tompkins for 15 years. "You can ride with us," he said, noting her obvious distress. "You might have saved his life tonight." The ambulance ride to Mercy General was a blur of sirens and Sarah's whispered prayers. She held onto the safety rail, watching the monitors that tracked Henry's fragile hold on life. Every fluctuation made her heart race, remembering how still he'd looked on that marble floor. At the hospital, chaos erupted the moment they wheeled Henry through the emergency doors. Sarah found herself pushed aside as doctors and nurses swarmed around him, shouting medical terminology she didn't understand. She stood there, still in her uniform, feeling completely out of place among the sterile walls and fluorescent lights. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Jenkins?" She turned to see a young woman approaching, her designer heels clicking against the hospital floor. Even in distress, Emily Tompkins carried herself with the same commanding presence as her father. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour, and her emerald eyes blazed with barely contained fury. "Emily?" Sarah had only seen Henry's daughter in photographs scattered around his study. "I didn't know you were." "Of course you didn't," Emily cut her off, her voice sharp as glass. "My father doesn't exactly keep me informed about his life anymore. I got the call from the hospital 30 minutes ago." She stepped closer, her perfectly manicured finger pointing accusingly at Sarah. "What I want to know is how this happened. Where were you when he collapsed?" Sarah felt the weight of guilt crash over her again. "I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after the dinner party. I should have checked on him sooner." "I should have." "You should have been doing your job," Emily's voice cracked with emotion she was trying to hide. "He pays you to take care of him, doesn't he? To make sure something like this doesn't happen?" The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She'd been asking herself the same questions since the moment she found Henry on the floor. But hearing them from his daughter, seeing the pain behind Emily's anger, made everything so much worse. "Mrs. Tompkins," Sarah began quietly, "I know you're hurting, but don't." Emily held up her hand, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Just don't. My father and I may have our problems, but he's all the family I have left. Mom died when I was 16, and he's been so focused on his business empire that we barely speak anymore. But I still love him, and I can't lose him too." Before Sarah could respond, the emergency room doors burst open again. A doctor in surgical scrubs approached them, his expression grave. Emily immediately straightened, wiping her tears and preparing for the worst news possible. But something about the way he carried himself made Sarah's blood run cold. This wasn't the face of someone bringing good news. The doctor's eyes darted between Emily and Sarah, as if weighing how much hope he could afford to give them. "Are you Mr. Tompkins' family?" he asked quietly. Emily nodded, suddenly looking much younger than her 28 years. "I'm his daughter. This is Sarah, his employee." The doctor's expression grew even more serious as he glanced at his clipboard, then back at them. "I need to speak with you both about Mr. Tompkins' condition. It's more complicated than we initially thought." The doctor's face remains unreadable as he approaches the small group huddled in the waiting room. Sarah feels her heart hammering against her ribs, while Emily clutches her purse so tightly her knuckles have turned white. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across everyone's faces, making this moment feel even more surreal. "Mrs. Tompkins," the doctor begins, his voice measured and professional. "Your father is stable, but I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The next 24 hours are absolutely critical. His heart stopped for over 4 minutes, and we're seeing some irregular rhythms that concern us. We're monitoring him closely, but..." Emily's sharp intake of breath cuts through his words. "But what? Is he going to be okay?" The doctor adjusts his glasses, choosing his words carefully. "We're doing everything we can. The CPR administered before we arrived likely saved his life, but there's still significant risk of complications." Sarah feels the weight of everyone's eyes on her, and suddenly the sterile hospital air feels suffocating. Without a word, she turns and walks toward the exit, her footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. She needs space to breathe, to think, to process everything that's happened in the last few hours. Outside, the storm that had raged earlier has begun to subside, leaving behind the clean, fresh scent of rain-washed pavement. Sarah leans against a wooden bench overlooking the hospital's small garden, her mind drifting back to another rainy night 20 years ago. She was just 12 then, watching her own mother struggle to breathe in a hospital bed much like Henry's. Her mother had been a housekeeper too, working 3 jobs to keep food on the table after Sarah's father left. "You take care of people, baby girl," her mother had whispered during those final days. "That's what makes us strong. Not money, not fancy things. Just taking care of each other." The memory brings tears to Sarah's eyes, but they're interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Emily stands there awkwardly, her designer heels clicking nervously against the wet concrete. "Can I sit?" Emily asks, her earlier hostility replaced by something softer, more uncertain. Sarah nods, scooting over to make room. For several minutes, they sit in silence, watching the last drops of rain fall from the hospital's awnings. "I owe you an apology," Emily finally says, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I said earlier, about you being responsible, that was unfair. I was scared and angry, and I took it out on you." Sarah turns to look at her, surprised by the genuine remorse in Emily's voice. "You were protecting your father. I understand that." "No, you don't understand," Emily continues, shaking her head. "I haven't spoken to my father in over 2 years. We had this huge fight about his business practices, about how he treats people, about everything. I stormed out and swore I'd never come back." Her voice cracks with emotion. "And now he might die, and the last thing I said to him was that I hated him." The vulnerability in Emily's confession touches something deep in Sarah's heart. "Why did you stay?" Emily asks suddenly. "All these years, putting up with his moods, his demands. He's not exactly known for his warmth." Sarah considers the question carefully. "Your father gave me a chance when nobody else would. I was a single mother with a high school education and a criminal record from some stupid mistakes I made as a teenager. But he looked past all that and gave me steady work, good benefits, and a chance to provide for my son." Emily's eyes widen. "You have a son?" "Had," Sarah corrects gently. "Marcus. He died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Your father, he paid for the funeral, helped me through the worst time of my life. He never said much about it, just quietly took care of everything." The revelation hangs between them like a bridge, connecting 2 women who had seen each other as adversaries just hours before. Emily reaches over and squeezes Sarah's hand, a gesture that speaks louder than any words could. But their moment of connection is shattered by the piercing wail of emergency alarms echoing from inside the hospital. Both women leap to their feet as they see medical staff rushing toward Henry's wing, their faces grim with urgency. "Code Blue, Room 314. Code Blue, Room 314. The announcement crackles over the hospital's intercom system, and Sarah's blood runs cold. Room 314 is Henry's room. The emergency alarms pierce through the hospital corridors like a siren of desperation. Sarah's heart pounds as she sprints down the hallway, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Emily runs beside her, all previous animosity forgotten in this moment of pure terror. "What's happening?" Emily gasps, but the nurses rushing past them provide no answers. They burst into Henry's room to find chaos, machines beeping frantically, medical staff surrounding the bed where Henry lies motionless. "He's flatlining," a nurse shouts. "We're losing him." Dr. Martinez looks up grimly. "We've been working on him for 3 minutes. His heart just stopped again." Without hesitation, Sarah pushes through the crowd of medical professionals. "Let me help him." "Ma'am, you need to step back. I saved him once, I can do it again." Sarah's voice carries a fierce determination that stops everyone in their tracks. She places her hands on Henry's chest, feeling for the familiar rhythm she'd memorized earlier. "Henry, you listen to me. You fought too hard to give up now." Emily watches in awe as Sarah begins CPR again, her movements precise and unwavering. This time, she's not alone in a dimly lit room with thunder roaring outside. This time, she has a team supporting her, but her touch, her connection to Henry, remains the constant. "Come on, Henry," Sarah whispers between compressions. "Your daughter is here. She needs you. We all need you." The heart monitor shows nothing but a flat line. 4 minutes have passed since Henry's heart stopped beating. Dr. Martinez exchanges worried glances with his team. They all know what 4 minutes without oxygen means for the brain. But Sarah doesn't stop. She thinks of Henry's laugh when she brought him his morning coffee, the way his eyes lit up when she remembered his late wife's favorite flowers for the garden. She thinks of all the small moments that built their unlikely friendship over the years. "You taught me that family isn't just blood," she says softly, continuing the compressions. "You showed me I was worth something. Now let me show you what that means." Emily steps closer, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, please. I'm sorry I stayed away so long. Sarah's been here for you when I wasn't. She loves you like family, and now I understand why." Suddenly, the monitor beeps. Once. Twice. Then a steady rhythm emerges, weak but present. "We've got him back," Dr. Martinez announces, relief flooding his voice. Heart rate is stabilizing. Sarah steps back, her legs trembling as the adrenaline fades. Emily immediately wraps her arms around the older woman, both of them sobbing with relief. 3 days later, Henry opens his eyes to find Sarah reading in the chair beside his bed, just like she used to do in his study at home. Emily sits on his other side, holding his hand. "Sarah?" His voice is barely a whisper. She looks up, her face breaking into the warmest smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Henry. The doctors told me what you did," he says, tears filling his eyes. "They said you brought me back twice." 4 minutes, Sarah. My heart was stopped for 4 minutes. "Well," she says with a gentle laugh, "you always were stubborn. Figured you needed some extra convincing." Henry turns to Emily, seeing his daughter clearly for what feels like the first time in years. "And you came." "Sarah called me," Emily admits. "She told me how much you talked about me, how much you missed me." "I'm sorry, Dad. I was so caught up in being angry about Mom's death that I forgot you were grieving too." Over the following weeks, as Henry recovers at home, everything changes. The grand estate that once felt like a monument to loneliness becomes filled with laughter and warmth. Emily visits regularly, sometimes staying for dinner that Sarah prepares with love rather than obligation. Henry makes good on his promise to change. He donates millions to healthcare programs and establishes a scholarship fund in Sarah's name. But the most profound change is in their relationship. Henry no longer sees Sarah as just his employee. She's family, the person who literally gave him life when his own body gave up. And Sarah, who spent years believing she was invisible, finally understands her own worth through Henry's grateful eyes. One evening, as they sit on the terrace watching the sunset, Henry turns to Sarah. "You know, I spent my whole life building walls around my heart, thinking wealth would protect me from pain. But you taught me something that day: the most valuable things in life can't be bought. They have to be earned through love, loyalty, and the courage to care when it matters most. Sarah smiles, her heart full. Sometimes God puts people in our lives not for what we can give them, but for what they can give us when we need it most. You gave me purpose, Mr. Henry. I just returned the favor. As the sun sets behind them, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, 3 hearts beat in perfect rhythm: a billionaire, his daughter, and the woman whose love and determination prove that the most precious things in life aren't found in bank accounts or boardrooms, but in the simple act of one human being refusing to let another slip away. What started as a story of CPR became something much deeper, a reminder that we all have the power to save each other, not just from death, but from lives half-lived, from loneliness, and from the walls we build around our hearts.